If someone you trusted more than anyone asked you to do something that crossed every boundary you believed in, what would you do? Would you walk away? Or would curiosity, guilt, and years of friendship make you question everything you thought was right? That's exactly what happened to me, and even now, I still wonder whether I should have seen the warning signs from the very beginning. Today's story comes from a shocking Reddit confession that starts with what seemed like an impossible request between lifelong friends. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of joke. We'd been friends for years. We'd celebrated birthdays together, helped each other through breakups, and stood by one another during some of the hardest moments in our lives. So when he asked to meet me privately and said he needed a huge favor, I never imagined the conversation would change everything. He looked nervous, almost desperate, as if he had rehearsed the words 100 times. Then he made a request that left me completely speechless. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood him. I laughed because I assumed he couldn't possibly be serious. But he wasn't laughing. He kept repeating that he trusted me more than anyone else and that there were reasons I didn't understand yet. Every instinct told me to leave. Nothing about the situation felt normal. The more he explained, the stranger the story became. He insisted that everyone involved knew what was happening, that no one was being forced into anything, and that there was a bigger reason behind his request. Even so, something felt deeply wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were important details he wasn't telling me. Over the next few days, I tried convincing myself to forget the entire conversation. But the messages kept coming. He sounded increasingly anxious, asking me to hear him out one last time before making a decision. Part of me wanted to block his number forever. Another part wanted answers. Why me? Why would anyone ask a close friend to become part of such a personal situation? And what wasn't he saying? Eventually, I agreed to meet him one final time. That's when he revealed something that completely changed how I viewed the situation. He admitted there was another layer to his plan, one he hadn't mentioned before. Suddenly, this wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about secrets, hidden motives, and a decision that could destroy friendships, marriages, and reputations in a single night. I wish I could tell you I walked away immediately. I wish I could say I recognized every red flag before it was too late. But life isn't always that simple, especially when emotions, loyalty, and years of history get mixed together. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about choosing between right and wrong, they're about figuring out who is telling the truth. What happened next still doesn't feel real. The house looked ordinary. The evening seemed normal. But behind those closed doors, someone had already put a plan into motion that none of us fully understood. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was already too late to pretend I hadn't been involved. And when I finally discovered the hidden truth that had been waiting for me all along, I realized this story was never about the favor itself. It was about a secret that would leave every person involved questioning trust, friendship, and betrayal forever. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before going inside. My phone was still open to our last conversation, and I kept rereading his messages, hoping I had somehow misunderstood them. The words were the same every time. He wanted me to trust him, and he promised that everything would make sense once he explained the full story. But the more I thought about it, the less sense any of it made. When I finally walked into the cafe, he was already waiting. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. This wasn't the confident friend I had known for years. He barely smiled when he saw me. Instead, he glanced around the room as if he was worried someone might be listening. That alone made me uneasy. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work. Family. Life. It almost felt like he was avoiding the real conversation. Then he leaned forward and quietly admitted that his marriage had been under enormous pressure for months. There had been arguments, trust issues, and problems that neither of them had shared with anyone. He insisted that appearances could be deceiving and that even the happiest couples often hide their biggest struggles. I listened without interrupting, but something still didn't add up. If he simply wanted advice, why all the secrecy? Why ask me to meet in private? Why make me promise not to tell anyone before he had even explained himself? Then he revealed another detail that caught me completely off guard. He said he had been documenting parts of his life because he believed someone close to him wasn't being honest. At first, I assumed he meant keeping notes or saving messages. But the way he described it made me realize he had gone much further than that. He had become obsessed with proving that his instincts were right, collecting little pieces of information that, in his mind, would eventually reveal the truth. That was the moment I started questioning whether I really knew my friend at all. Looking back, there had been signs. Small comments. Strange questions. Moments that seemed harmless at the time but now felt completely different. I had ignored them because I trusted him. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. Before we left the cafe, he asked me for one last favor. He said I didn't have to answer right away, but if I agreed, I had to promise to keep an open mind until I understood everything. His expression wasn't angry or manipulative. It was almost desperate, as though he believed this was the only way to uncover the truth. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a situation far more complicated than I had imagined. I had no idea that hidden decisions had already been made, and somewhere behind the scenes, a plan was quietly unfolding that would soon force everyone involved to face consequences no one had expected. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that the smartest decision was to walk away. I had my own life, my own responsibilities, and no reason to get involved in someone else's personal problems. But every time I decided to ignore it, another message from him appeared. None of them were dramatic. None of them tried to pressure me. They all carried the same quiet request: please hear the whole story before you judge me. That was what made it so difficult. He wasn't acting like someone trying to trick me. He sounded like someone carrying a burden that had become too heavy to hide. After years of friendship, I couldn't completely ignore that. At the same time, another question kept bothering me. Why hadn't he asked anyone else? He had brothers, cousins, and friends he had known even longer than me. Yet somehow, I was the person he trusted with whatever plan he was putting together. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. As the days passed, I started noticing small details I had overlooked before. He had become distant from almost everyone in our friend group. He rarely joined weekend gatherings, and when he did, he seemed distracted. Even simple conversations felt forced, as though his mind was somewhere else. Looking back, it seemed like he had been carrying this secret for a long time. I also couldn't stop wondering about his wife. Every time I had spoken with her, she had been polite and friendly. She never hinted that anything unusual was happening behind closed doors. If there really were serious problems in their marriage, she hid them remarkably well. That only made the mystery deeper. Then, late one evening, my phone rang. It wasn't my friend. It was someone connected to the situation who simply said, "Before you make any decision, there's something you deserve to know." Those words changed everything, because for the first time, I realized I might not be hearing the complete truth from either side. I almost ignored the call. The number wasn't saved in my phone, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Something told me to answer anyway. The voice on the other end was calm but cautious. They didn't introduce themselves right away. Instead, they asked if I had spoken to my friend recently. When I said yes, there was a long pause before they quietly replied, "Then you need to be very careful." I immediately asked what they meant, but the answers were vague. They explained that my friend had been acting differently for months, making decisions that worried the people closest to him. He believed he was putting together pieces of a puzzle, but according to the caller, he had become so focused on proving his suspicions that he was no longer seeing the bigger picture. The conversation ended almost as suddenly as it had begun. Before hanging up, the caller said one final sentence that stayed with me the rest of the night: "Not everything is happening the way you've been told." That single statement turned my confusion into doubt. I wasn't sure who to believe anymore. My friend insisted he was trying to uncover the truth. Someone else was warning me that I was only hearing one side of the story. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. The following afternoon, my friend asked to meet one last time before everything moved forward. His message was short, but there was an urgency I hadn't seen before. He said that after this meeting, there would be no turning back. When I arrived, he placed a small envelope on the table without saying a word. Inside were several printed pages and a handwritten note. He watched my expression as I looked through them, waiting for me to notice something important. I hadn't even reached the final page before I realized this situation was far more complicated than I had imagined. Just as I looked up to ask the question that had been building in my mind from the very beginning, someone unexpectedly walked into the room, and the silence that followed made it clear that everything was about to change. The person who walked into the room wasn't someone I expected to see. For a split second, nobody spoke. My friend looked genuinely surprised, while the newcomer's expression suggested they already knew far more than either of us realized. The atmosphere changed instantly. Whatever confidence my friend had shown just moments earlier seemed to disappear. The newcomer calmly looked at the envelope on the table before turning to me. "You should know that those papers don't tell the whole story," they said. Their voice wasn't angry or emotional. It was steady, almost like someone who had rehearsed those words over and over. My friend immediately disagreed, insisting that every page was backed by facts and that he had spent months putting everything together. I sat there, looking from one person to the other, feeling like I had walked into the middle of a mystery that had started long before I ever became involved. Every explanation seemed believable on the surface, yet every explanation also left important questions unanswered. Instead of getting clarity, I was becoming more confused with every passing minute. Then the newcomer revealed something that completely shifted my perspective. According to them, my friend hadn't simply been searching for answers. He had become convinced that hidden clues existed in ordinary events, and he had started connecting unrelated details into one larger story. Messages, schedules, receipts, casual conversations, he believed they all pointed toward the same conclusion. The problem was that nobody else could see the pattern the way he did. My friend pushed back immediately. He reached into his bag and pulled out another folder, explaining that there was one final piece of evidence he hadn't shown anyone. He claimed it would prove he wasn't imagining things. But before opening it, he hesitated. It was as if he suddenly realized that once everyone saw what was inside, there would be no way to go back. That hesitation spoke louder than any argument. The room fell silent again. Nobody reached for the folder. Nobody knew whether opening it would answer our questions or create even bigger ones. I could feel the tension building with every second that passed. As I looked at my friend, I realized this wasn't just a Reddit story about trust, friendship, and hidden secrets anymore. It had become a story about perspective, about how two people could experience the same events and walk away with completely different versions of the truth. Then my phone vibrated. A new message appeared from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. ***, don't let him open the folder until you know who wrote the last page. ***. I slowly looked back at the envelope in front of me. I had read every page except the one at the very bottom. Until that moment, I hadn't even noticed that the handwriting on the final sheet looked completely different from all the others. My hands froze over the envelope. Nobody said a word as I carefully pulled out the final page. The handwriting was unmistakably different. The neat, organized notes that filled the earlier pages were gone, replaced by a shorter message written in hurried strokes. I read it twice before looking up, unsure of what to think. The note wasn't evidence against anyone. It was a warning. It explained that once people become convinced they have found the answer, they often stop questioning their own assumptions. It urged whoever found the page to verify every claim, no matter how convincing it seemed. At the bottom was a signature I recognized immediately. It belonged to someone our friend group had trusted for years, a person known for staying calm whenever disagreements got out of control. Before I could ask how that page had ended up in the folder, the newcomer quietly admitted they had placed it there days earlier. They had hoped my friend would read it before involving anyone else, but he never reached the last page. He became so focused on proving his theory that he treated every new detail as confirmation instead of asking whether there could be another explanation. For the first time that day, my friend stopped arguing. He looked down at the folders spread across the table. Months of notes, screenshots, timelines, and observations suddenly seemed less certain than they had only minutes before. He admitted that he had spent so much time searching for proof that he had forgotten to ask the people closest to him simple, honest questions. The tension in the room slowly gave way to silence. It wasn't the silence of victory. It was the silence that comes when everyone realizes how easily fear, doubt, and assumptions can grow into something much bigger than the truth. I finally understood why I had been pulled into the situation. My friend wasn't looking for someone to take sides. Deep down, he had been looking for someone he trusted enough to tell him when he was going too far. I stood up and told him the same thing I wish someone had told all of us much earlier. Trust can't be rebuilt through suspicion, and answers don't come from collecting fragments while avoiding difficult conversations. They come from honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable. My friend nodded, folded the papers back into the envelope, and quietly apologized for dragging everyone into his personal struggle. It didn't erase the weeks of confusion, but it was the first genuine step toward repairing the relationships that had been damaged. As we walked out together, I thought the story was finally over. Then the newcomer stopped us at the door. "There is one last thing," they said. They reached into their pocket and handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across the front. "I've been waiting until today to give you this." I opened it after everyone had left. Inside was a single photograph taken years earlier at a gathering I barely remembered. On the back, someone had written a sentence that sent a chill down my spine. The real story didn't begin with this investigation. It began on the day this picture was taken. Suddenly, I realized the mystery we'd just untangled had only explained the present. The past was still waiting to be uncovered. And that truth, I suspected, would change everything I thought I knew about our friendship. I stared at the photograph for several minutes before I noticed the small detail everyone else had missed. In the corner of the picture was the date. It wasn't connected to any of the recent events at all. It had been taken years earlier during a simple weekend gathering with friends. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked relaxed. Yet the message on the back suggested that something important had started that day. The next afternoon, I met with the person who had given me the envelope. They explained that the photograph wasn't meant to expose a hidden secret. It was meant to remind us how easily memories can change over time. We all remembered that gathering differently. Some remembered harmless jokes, others remembered tense conversations, and a few barely remembered it at all. The point wasn't that someone had been lying. The point was that people often build completely different stories from the same moment. That conversation finally helped everything fall into place. My friend had spent months trying to solve a mystery by collecting isolated pieces instead of looking at the complete picture. Every message, every coincidence, and every misunderstanding became another puzzle piece supporting the conclusion he had already reached. Looking back, it wasn't one dramatic event that created the conflict. It was weeks of assumptions, poor communication, and fear quietly growing into something much bigger than reality. Over the following weeks, our group slowly found its way back to normal. Some conversations were uncomfortable, and rebuilding trust didn't happen overnight. But people finally started talking honestly instead of guessing what others were thinking. Apologies were made where they were needed, and boundaries were respected moving forward. While not every friendship returned to exactly the way it had been before, everyone left with a better understanding of how important open communication really is. As for me, the experience changed the way I look at every difficult situation. Whenever someone tells only one side of a story, I remind myself that there is almost always another perspective waiting to be heard. Rushing to conclusions is easy. Taking the time to understand people is much harder, but it usually leads to better answers. That's why this Reddit story has stayed with me for so long. On the surface, it seemed like a shocking story about friendship, trust, hidden secrets, and impossible decisions. But underneath, it became a reminder that assumptions can damage relationships just as much as dishonesty. Sometimes the biggest mystery isn't discovering what happened, it's understanding why people see the same events so differently. If there's one lesson I took away from all of this, it's simple. Protect your friendships by asking honest questions before believing your fears. A single conversation can prevent months of confusion, and trust is far easier to preserve than it is to rebuild. Even today, whenever I come across another Reddit confession or relationship story online, I remember that experience. Every story has more than one side, every decision has consequences, And the truth is rarely as simple as it first appears. And sometimes, the most valuable ending isn't exposing a secret, it's learning enough to make sure the same mistakes are never repeated again.